In your bag that Kim gave you, you should have the book that looks like this, which is for you to take notes.
And here's the book. I took the book out of my bag.
She need this one. She can have this one.
Oh, that's fine. You can have that one.
And so it goes along with the slides. You're not going to have every single slide. We kind of pared it down for the purpose of copying. But I'll have some additional ones thrown in here later on. But there's room for you to take notes. And again, adult learning principles. We don't give you every single little piece of information on the slide. We want you to write it in and fill it in and take your own notes and stuff because we all learn in different ways. So whichever way you learn, if you're an auditory learner, then you'll be learning by what I'm saying. If you're visual, you're going to see it up here. We're going to do some interactive activities and get up and move around. If you need to go to the restroom, just get up and go. When we get to a certain point, we'll take a short break and all of that. But we are expediting things today because we have to be out of here sooner than we expected. So, our vision, PRN's leadership vision, that's Partners Resource Network. Our vision is to expand opportunities to enhance the quality of life of children and young adults with disabilities and their families based on parents helping other parents. And our goal is that no one has to go alone to an ARD meeting, so that you are not feeling like you're that one person on that side of the table and it's all these professionals. We've all been there and done that, right? And it's a little bit intimidating. It's not, they don't intend it to be intimidating, but it's just set up that way. You've got all these professionals that have to be there, and we're going to go over that in detail here in a minute. And then it's you. And it does seem like they know a lot more sometimes than we do. Leadership. I start with the premise that the function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers. And so we're going to talk about leadership after lunch. The leadership part, we're going to focus before lunch on the whole ARD part, the whole ARD structure, what all that's supposed to look like. And then after lunch, or in the middle of lunch, or wherever we are in time-wise, we're going to talk about leadership and what does that mean and how can we be a leader in our community, how can we be a leader to another parent, with the purpose of educating them so they can be the leader. We're all leaders for our family, right, just naturally as mothers. But we want to encourage that other parent to take that leadership role. We get parents, that call all the time and say, can you recommend an advocate? And it's like, well, we could, but can we educate you in the process so that you can be the advocate for your child? Because guess what? We're the expert on our own child. We know things about our own child that we can bring to the table in the ARD process, but we might not know how or when am I supposed to bring that up, or should I bring that up, or is that important, or is it not important? Everything is important. If it's a concern to us, it's important. And we can bring it up, and we can work with that team of people. My son's only been in the high school now for a semester. We were new in El Campo going into 6th grade. We grew up, my husband and I both, we grew up in Katy. And so my kids were in the Katy school system, which is a huge school system. 60,000 students now in that school system, 7 high schools and all this. And then we moved to El Campo. Little, small, rural, 10,000 people in the city limits, which we love. We're from an agriculture background, agriculture family and all of that. But when I hit the door, they didn't know what hit them, right? And so there was a lot of educating that went on both of our sides of the table. But they had never seen a parent hit their door that came in with the binder that's this thick and, okay, I'm ready, let's get down to business, So now I'm at the high school, and of course my older son's been there for a while. My younger one with the Asperger's, now he's a freshman, and we were 3 weeks into the school year, and I said, back up the bus, we have some issues we need to discuss, let's have a staffing. And they're like, what? We're having a staffing with a parent, you know? And it's like, yes, and get used to it. We've had 2 already, you know, and we're only halfway through the school year. And so, you know, I already know when his annual's gonna be and all this, and got them educated right quick that I am part of this team, and I am anytime something comes up, man, I am calling that team. Because that team is there for him and me and to support all of us together. And so that's what we want for all parents. We want them to know that they can contact those professionals because they have expertise that we need to tap into. And when I don't know what I need to do for my son in a certain situation, man, I'm calling our autism specialist. I've got her number. We're texting. I'm like, what do I do about this? You know, just had an incident the other day with the shop teacher. You know, he actually told my older son, I don't think I can teach him. And I'm like, dude, if you think that you can't teach a child, it's time to retire. And he's an old guy anyhow that needs to retire. But I was just like, okay, you need to go talk to him or whatever. He needs support. So we're going to discuss a familiar procedure called the ARD meeting and how it should be structured and what happens when educators try to alter the structure or deviate from it, and what we can do about it. And the more that we know about what is supposed to happen at what point, the more we can prepare for it and be ready for those talking points. And also an effective approach to providing leadership to other parents in the context of the ARD meeting and the educational process. So that's our goal for today. And like I said in the Day 2 webinar, we're going to expand on some more of this and some more of the leadership. Before we do that, while we're focusing on the ARD process this morning, I want us to think about, I need 2 volunteers. Who's going to help me? Okay, if you don't volunteer, you get volunteered. Oh, okay, Donna is one. Yeah. Okay, come on up.
Oh, you
Come
have
help
to
me. I
go.
hope y'all can see this over here. We're going to utilize the whiteboard because it's cool.
Old
And I
school.
don't have to put things all over the walls. I guess that'll show up there. Okay, so we're going to talk about, tell me, and y'all can just yell this out, and they're going to be our scribes and write this, okay? You're the scribes. So tell me some positives of the ARD process and some challenges. I don't like to use the word negatives because that's negative. But what are some challenges in the ARD process, just in your general knowledge of it, in participating in it? And what are some positives that you see in that process? Because so much of what we see is maybe difficult for us, right? Okay, so tell us, what do you see?
Understanding words.
And, okay, acronyms
Words or acronyms.
is a challenge.
Yeah,
Yep.
the language is completely
Okay.
different.
Good, that's a challenge for sure, because they're talking a whole different language. What else?
I think on the positive side, it is supposed to be a collaborative meeting where you both decide.
Yeah,
What's best for the
collaborative
child.
team, right? That whole team I was just talking about.
Oh, on the challenging side of that, a lot of times parents don't realize that they're able to, input information.
That they're part of the team.
Exactly.
Okay, parents don't know that they're part of the team. Right. You're just called to this meeting and you go in and
You're just
everybody's
someone.
making all these decisions and they're like, okay, and you're like,
Angela Calvin.
Yeah, they don't think they can say no.
I don't know. Yeah, exactly.
So one of the positives is you get to know the teachers and the people that are going to be working with your child.
Okay.
So, because they always have, like, for mine, they always have the special ed, a lot of times the aide that'll help, the teachers.
Yeah.
And they all talk, they know how they're going to, they know how they're going to work together.
Right.
So the plan gets formed and they know.
You get to know that team. Good. Okay, what else? What else positive or challenging about the process?
The positive is they get to know the parent, like you said, the parent's involved, they have a thick notebook, she kind of knows what she's doing. And a lot of times they'll say, well, I'm going to do my job because you're going to make sure I'm going to do my job.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, you should do it anyway.
And
But
I've had,
especially with parents that are educated
Right.
and know their rights, they're more apt to listen.
I've had educators tell me that they have learned something from me. The diag after that first staffing that we had, that I called,
Right.
and I'm like, okay, here's the situation, what can we do about it? And she was like, man, I learned so much from you today.
Yeah.
I wish every parent was like that. I hear that so many times. Have you heard that too?
Mhm.
What else?
What I've been seeing a lot of on your comment lately on the challenges side is the teachers or the professionals, they think they know all of the facts, but what they're really presenting is their opinion or their interpretation, and they're not trying to missway anybody, but if you're not a parent who understands
Right.
the law, the way it's written, you're using misconstrued information.
Right.
That can be a challenge.
Well, a lot of times they're just doing what they think they're
It's
supposed to be
what you
doing.
do.
It's not anything malicious or anything.
Right.
No.
It's just, they don't know.
The art's to get everybody on the same page, working together.
Yes.
And I don't know about anyone else, but I mean, I always have to do stuff at home too. I
Oh,
keep
yeah.
up the
Oh,
same
yeah.
stuff they're doing at school at home to make sure that it all goes more
Oh,
smoothly.
yeah. Awesome. Anything else that you can think of? We can throw more up there
I
as we
think
go.
the challenge is it's sometimes really overwhelming for parents, whether you know or you don't know.
Yes.
It's overwhelming, it's
Overwhelming.
emotional.
Yeah.
I know the first hard meeting this year, remember I cried through the whole thing, cried through the whole thing. It felt just
Yes.
ridiculous when I left, but I was
Well, these are our
frustrated
babies.
because I
Yeah.
just felt like they
Right.
weren't listening to what I had to say, but at the same time, I didn't know what I needed to say.
Right.
So that,
Right.
You don't know what you
Part
don't
of that was
know.
my fault too.
They didn't help yet.
Yeah.
But it's
can't
the
speak their
process
language
is over.
there.
They're gonna
Oh, but
let
when
you
I
in
went back
on
9
it.
weeks later. They just went.
Uh-huh.
And
created a
God, she wants to.
Money.
Yeah.
Money is a challenge.
Money.
Money is a
Because I
challenge.
hear, we can't do this because we don't have money, we can't do this because we don't have money.
And they're not supposed to say that.
Oh,
No.
I hear it all the time.
Yeah, that's one of those, isn't
We
it?
could whip out some law on that.
Oh, no,
and
I
say-
did, because they cut his OT, but I got it back.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, they try to say that to parents. Oh, we don't have that here.
Oh, yeah.
Or we don't, and those webinars Chuck's gonna do, that's what it's all about, that in the know is these comments. He has like 75 comments like that.
Yeah.
We can't afford that, we don't need to do that, we don't have to do these certain things. So he's gonna address those with the law, and so it's
Well,
gonna be
then, I mean, my son, he was he had a regression of erratic weight loss. And, I asked for the OT to work with me, and they're, oh, we don't have money. And I was like, well, it would be medically necessary. And they gave it to me. So,
Yeah, if he's not well enough to go to school,
oh,
that's
then I'll be.
affecting him
Yeah,
educationally,
so-
yes. Okay, good, thank you, scribes, for helping us. If you think of something as we're talking about it, just jump up and go write it up there, it's no problem. Okay, so that helps us get focused hopefully on some of the positives and the challenges, and at the end, we will have enough time. We're gonna come back to our list and see if what we have talked about today is going to provide us with any solutions perhaps to addressing some of the challenges and to maybe enhancing some of the positives. So we're talking about the art structure for this first part. And, oh, you know what, I have my sticky note here on this previous one. Going back to some of these challenges about procedures and things. I was on a webinar not too long ago that another organization was doing on the RDA process. Has anybody heard of RDA yet? I didn't know exactly what it was, but RDA is results-driven accountability. Results-driven accountability. You're going to be hearing more about this because there has been a shift in the thinking. This is federal. This is coming down federal to states. And the way that the law has been set up the way that it is set up, is that there are so many procedures that schools have to follow in the ARD paperwork. The guy said there was 755 process requirements under IDEA that schools have to adhere to. 755 process requirements to make sure every I is dotted, every T is crossed, right? And if they go astray on one little thing, or they say, no, we can't afford the OT, and we can go to the law and go, you know what, it says right here, right? So how can they keep up with that? No wonder they are like, all the time making sure that everything is done just right, right? They have right now a checklist mentality. Okay, we check, we've done everything. But then are we getting results for our children? So the tide is turning with RDA to start having to make them accountable for results. Are we getting the results that we need from our plan? And that's what that webinar was all about. Their statistic, and I didn't write down if this was a Texas statistic or a national statistic, but only 53.99% of students with disabilities are graduating with an actual diploma. 53%, half. I want to say that's a national statistic, but I could be wrong on that. Could have been
What do you
Texas.
think's driving the 53%? Because I'm not gonna say I'm an advocate for the school, okay, but part of that's on the parents too,
Yes.
okay? I just got, my oldest one's, he's just done regular education now. He's dealing with his dysgraphia, he's getting A's. He's gonna go to college, he's overcome his learning disability. I fully expect my younger one to do the same thing.
Because you expect it and set the bar up here.
And because
And where do schools typically set the bar?
Well, we can't let them set it there.
Exactly.
That's our job in the art to make sure it doesn't do, we don't do
But
that.
why do we see 70% success rate on IEPs? Oh, they only have to get 70%. Well, 70% is passing. So, when we say, no, I want 80 or 90% on that IEP goal.
It is on there.
And then they're like,
But it's online.
well, we only have to do 70.
No.
Because that's passing. And I say to them, would you be satisfied if your child was only just passing? Then why do I have to also be satisfied because my child's only just passing? That's not acceptable to me. I want to set the bar higher. I have higher expectations for him. And so we push it up. But that RDA, that's what that's about. And it's not going to be based on procedures and, oh, you have all your boxes checked. Are those students achieving? Students with disabilities, that's who we're talking about. Students with disabilities, are they achieving? Are they reaching goals? Where are they? So it's exciting for us as parents that that's going to be the push, but I made a note of that and I put it in here because that is one of the reasons that we have, anytime you have law involved, you're going to have two sides of a table, right? It's set up that way. They have what we want, and we have to figure out how to get what they have that we want for our kids. It sets up an adversarial relationship. It's the law. That's what legal things do. So realizing that and realizing how many process requirements that they have and making sure that they have all their boxes checked and everything, maybe we have to give them a little break, right? Understanding that. But we still have to keep the bar high for our kids. I'll try not to get on too many soapboxes today. The ARD structure, what is ARD? Admission, review, and dismissal. Did you ever know that? What is this ARD thing? Did you know that only in Texas do we call it an ARD?
Yes, I learned that when I
It is
went.
called the IEP meeting in every other 49 states plus territories.
Really?
Yeah.
But in Texas, we like to be different and special, so we're going to call it an ARD meeting. Don't know why, but that's what it is, and it's the same thing. So we can use the term interchangeably with IEP team, ARD committee, it's the same thing, okay? So if you're reading in the actual law, special education law, IDEA, you're gonna see IEP team. Never in here anywhere are you gonna see ARD. You're gonna see it in Texas law, Texas state law, but in IDEA, you're gonna see IEP team, the IEP team, the same thing. Okay, so just realize that, because one of the first trainings I did there, somebody was like, wait, back up, what does ARD mean? I'm like, oh, okay, so again, acronyms, right, that we love. If we run across an acronym that you don't know, hey, tell us what that is, okay? So we're going to talk about what is the structure of the ARD meeting, what comes where, what is addressed at these different times, and is it the same in all places? So that's our goal for the next little bit. We're going to look at the ARD structure and what it is, more specifically, how to help parents understand it and know those individual steps, and how to follow the agenda of the ARD. Every ARD should have an agenda that they're following. I've noticed sometimes now that schools are actually posting their ARD agenda on the wall. Went to an ARD with my friend back in Katy at the high school, and they actually, in the room where we have the ARD, on the wall in a big chart, they have the ARD agenda listed up there. So the agenda is pretty much the same from when there's an order that we have to go in, and there's a purpose to the order. So we're going to talk about that. And so this is the ARD agenda. We've broken it down into 8 steps. We're going to go step by step through these and talk in detail about each one, what's going to happen, what is supposed to be happening. This is the general order outlined in IDEA, our federal law, as to what is supposed to take place when and why. Okay? So if nothing else, if you don't learn anything else today, learn the ARD agenda. This is a slide that you could pull out and take with you. This book right here, is everybody familiar with the IDEA manual? This is one of our very favorite resources. You can download this yourself at the ARC of Texas or Disability Rights Texas. We were at a meeting last week in Austin, and somebody was there from the ARC, I think it was, and she said that they're in the process of updating this because there's new regs that just came out, new regulations, like last week, like January 1. In fact, we're going to do a webinar with TEA. They're going to do a staff training, and then we'll make it public for y'all on the new regulations because there's some new stuff that we need to know. But this is a great manual, and when you get your parent leader toolkit, I did actually pull this out and put it in there, but right in the middle of the book, smack dab in the middle, if you have a hard copy of the book, it's right at the Staples. But here's the ARD agenda, which is awesome. And there's also a great before ARD checklist in here. And there's also great letters, sample letters for anything, because you know we have to put stuff in writing. If it's not in writing, it hasn't been said. If it's not in writing, we have not said it. Okay? So we got to get everything in writing. We make our requests in writing. We expect them to respond in writing. Why? Because it creates a paper trail for us. Why? Because if we need to go and file a complaint or do something else for our procedural safeguards that are outlined for us in dispute resolution, we need to have written documentation. So this is a great resource. The ARD agenda is in there. But we're going to go with these 8 steps. So the first step in the ARD process is introductions. The very first thing we do when we get to the ARD meeting. Introductions, the purpose of the meeting, and parent rights. That's what happens first. Right? We all go around the table and introduce ourselves. Even though we may know everybody that's in the room at the ARD meeting, there may be some personnel that we don't know that are there, and we need to know, or we haven't met them or whatever. So there's always introductions, and it's always noted who is there at the meeting. So let's talk for a minute about who is in an ARD meeting and why do they have to be there. Because this is really important, and this is outlined in IDEA. There are certain people that have to be on this ARD committee. They are required members. Let's see if I can spell today. I know I can't spell and talk. I already know that. We have required members, I'm gonna put required. And we have optional, I'm gonna call them optional. They're actually really important people, but they're not necessarily required under the law to be there. But we do have certain people that are required. So you tell me, who's required? Just one at a time, we'll list them and then talk about why they're required. Who's required?
Special ed teacher.
Okay, special ed teacher. Why do we need the special ed teacher and why are they required? Who knows?
Is that the same thing as an inclusion teacher?
It could be, yes. Inclusion teacher, they could be called different things.
I think more highly trained in, the modifications and, different ways of teaching
Exactly.
individual kids.
Yes. To get a special education certification, you have a regular teaching certification, but then you get additional coursework, right, to complete additional certification for special education. Special education teachers specialize in modifying and accommodating for students with disabilities. So they're the experts in the special education process and what we need to do to accommodate and modify and write IEPs and all of that, goals and things. So yes, so they are the experts on the special ed process, so we need to have them at that ARD meeting. So that's what this is all about. Who else has to be there?
Principal.
Okay, an administrator. Why?
Is it for the reason of determining what's affordable or not?
Not necessarily what's affordable, sometimes that's the angle that it goes. They're the purse string holder, right?
The purse string holder.
Mhm. They know what resources are available. Okay, now, just because they know what resources are available, does that mean that they get to sit there and rubber stamp and go, no, you can't have this, no, we can't afford this? No, that's not their purpose. Their purpose is when that art committee is deciding something, if we decide that a certain thing is needed for a student, then they're responsible for making sure that that happens. Not to say, no, we can't do that, but to say, oh, that's what that student needs, let's examine what our resources in this district, outside of the district, the Region Service Center, the whatever, outside contracting. If a student needs something, and the art committee has determined that they need that based on what the student needs, then it has to be provided. And so the administrator is the one that has the purse string holder, but they know about the resources that are available. They are also ultimately responsible for every child learning in their campus, right? They're the top dog. Usually it's the principal or assistant principal. It's going to be an administrator. Sometimes you'll have a special ed director, sometimes you'll have somebody from administration, central administration, but we always have to have an administrator of some sort. Okay, who else?
A teacher, isn't there a teacher?
It's general.
General ed teacher. Okay, why, even if we have a kid that's in life skills, they never even go to general ed, yet that general ed teacher has to go sit in that meeting. Why?
Does that have to do with least
It does have to do with least restrictive.
Do curriculum, expectations, and
Right. What is our curriculum in the state of Texas called? Who knows? TEKS, which stands for Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And guess what? Even if you have a disability and you're getting special education services, you're still required to learn the TEKS curriculum. That's our state curriculum for the entire state if you're in public school. Okay? So even if you have a disability, you're still expected to learn the same skills, the same knowledge that other students without disabilities are expected to learn. That's the TEKS. Who's the expert in the TEKS? the general ed teacher, because they're responsible for it every single day in their classroom. So we need to have them there to know they're the experts on that curriculum. They're supposed to be the experts on that curriculum. So we've got to have that general ed teacher. It also has to do with least restrictive. And we're going to talk about least restrictive when we get to that part. Okay? So that's why general ed, experts in the curriculum, experts in special education, purse string holder, who else has to be at the meeting? See, I left a spot up here at the top. Did you notice? Parent.
The VIP.
That's right, VIP, very important parent. Okay, actually, I learned this not too long ago. I can't remember, it was some workshop or webinar or something. But parent, actually, when they reauthorized IDEA in 2004, before parent was down in the list somewhere, they moved parent to the top of the list. It's actually in IDEA, listed in essential members of that IEP team, parent, or somebody standing in for the parent. So parent is identified in our procedural safeguards. And this defines what a parent is, and so that includes anybody that is raising a child, anybody that is responsible for the child, guardian, foster parent, surrogate, all that kind of stuff. And so they are an essential part of the ARD committee. Can we have an ARD meeting without a parent there? Yep.
Yes, you can elect not to go.
You can elect not to go. You can ignore the invitations. But the school is mandated to make every effort that they can to get a parent there. And they have to document that they have tried everything they can to get the parent there. That's why you might get multiple notices. Yes, I already know about this. Yes, they're mailing them, they're sending them, they're emailing them. That's because they are
only
mandated.
mailed one to an address that's no longer on file.
They sent one to an address not on file. So they have to make every effort, every reasonable effort to not only have the meeting at a mutually agreed upon time when you can both be there. They can't say, this is the time for the ARD and this is the only time we can have the ARD and it's not good for you.
I've had school try that,
Mhm.
and I was like, no, sorry,
No.
I can't put leave in.
And they're like, well, we can do it
All
without
mine are held behind.
you. We can do the ARD without you. No.
Yes, no, I've been on my phone.
Yes, you can. You can participate by phone conference, video
On a
conference.
brief card.
There you
Where I
go.
already
Yes.
knew what was going on.
Maybe not an annual.
No,
Right.
no, never.
There's one more person that's essential to the ARD committee. Do you know who that is? Diagnostician. Right. Diag for short. Diagnostician. Or, I'm going to put or, LSSP. What's LSSP? Licensed Specialist in School Psychology. Why do we have to have a DIAG or an LSSP at the meeting? What is their specialization? What do they do? Testing. Educational testing. We're not basing any of this on medical tests. We may bring that information to the table, but our whole process, the entire ARD process, is based on educational evaluations. Everything we do from the beginning of the ARD to the end needs to go back to that evaluation data. We'll talk about that when we get to that point. But the diagnostician or LSSP are the experts in that. They're the ones that administer these tests and can interpret the test and the implications of the test for the student. So not only do we have to have the test, but we need to know, what does this mean? What does this mean for the student when it says that they have a score of 70 in reading fluency? Well, that means it's a need, first of all, but then they should also pull into their report recommendations of how to deal with that. They're the experts on that, so we need to have them at the meeting. Now, the law says you only have to have them at the meeting if you are discussing evaluation reports. Different districts do it differently. In our district, the diagnostician is the one actually that runs the meeting. She's the one that does all the paperwork and all of that. It was the same way in Katy. They were the ones. Some school districts now have ARD facilitators, and the diagnosticians and LSSPs, all they do is the testing, and then they'll come in only when there is testing to discuss. But we're always going back to those evaluations, or should be, especially at the annual ARD. So we need to have the DIAG or LSSP there. School psychologists will typically be doing the psychological part of the testing. Diagnosticians will be doing those educational, the Woodcock-Johnson and the WISC and the Wessler and all those that we've heard of, right? Who are some optional people that could also be at the ARD meeting? Any ideas?
Apparently.
You are awesome. I love that. Okay. Yes, a parent leader. Or we could say any person that the parent feels needs to be at the meeting and invites them. If a parent invites somebody to the meeting, like a parent leader or a friend, or their child's private speech pathologist, or their child's private occupational therapist, or whoever is working with that child, that person is then considered a part of this committee and can speak to the committee. I can't tell you how many parents that I've talked to that say, well, you know, I went to a meeting with my friend, and they would not speak directly to me. They would speak only to her and say, like, ignore them like they're not even in the room. Well, if you are at the meeting and you've been invited by the parent, you are there to contribute, and you can speak, okay? So just keep that in mind. They might have you sign something. They might have the parent sign something, confidentiality. Oh, well, they're here because, you know, sign this. Please. If they're there, they know the child, right? It's supposed to be somebody that knows the child and can contribute to the meeting. So it's parent leader or anybody that the parent invites. Who else might be optional? What if they get additional services called related services? Like speech, OT,
Adaptive PE,
APE, sure,
music therapy.
PT, physical therapy, you know, any of those related services. Maybe they get vision, maybe they get hearing, maybe they get counseling. My son gets counseling as a related service, and that counselor comes to the ARD. They are not required to be there, but if they are providing services, it's good that they are. If they are not going to be there and it's the annual ARD and you're discussing new goals and new, updating goals and things, and they cannot be there, they need to send that information ahead to the committee to discuss. And typically, if they're not going to be there, they will discuss it with the parent ahead of time. You know, when my son was getting speech, there were some times when the speech teacher couldn't be there, but we met ahead of time, or we talked on the phone ahead of time and discussed what needed to happen. So related service personnel are optional. Once they get in high school, and we are talking about transition and transitioning out of high school, you may have adult service providers such as DARS, adult services, the MHMR, Mental Health Authority, WorkSource, different entities like that, which can also be involved because we're going to talk about transition in a lot more detail in the webinar, the Day 2 webinar. I have learned a lot about transition because my son is 15, and what that's supposed to look like, and we don't have a transition person in our district anymore. When the budget cuts came a couple years ago, that's what they cut, transition specialists. It's like, wait a minute, so what do we do for transition? So adult services like DARS, MHMR, workforce. Anybody that's gonna be involved once they graduate or age out of the system can be invited to the ARD, but you as a parent need to make sure that they're invited. So like my son's ARD is gonna come up in March, and I've already said, we've already met with DARS. We met with her a couple weeks ago. They're starting now to work with students younger than junior or senior year, which is awesome. And I said, you know what, I want that DARS person to be invited. She might not be able to come, but I want her invited. So this is the ARD committee. You may have additional people, and maybe you have a behavior specialist, or, I don't know, different people that may be in there, but we have required members, and then we have some others. You could feasibly have an entire table full of people, right? We had 17 people at my son's annual ARD. It was quite an interesting ARD, that was. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. But when we were transitioning into high school, I wanted high school people to be there to answer those questions. So as a parent, we will talk about this more in the day 2 webinar, but as a parent, we have the right to invite various people that we want, school personnel, to be at that meeting if we need them to be there and to contribute. Okay. Then we talked about the purpose of the meeting. Let's talk about that for a minute. We have different reasons for having an ARD meeting. Let's see, okay, do we have all of this? I'll just use the bottom part here, because I want to leave this up here, because we're going to talk about VIP here, right? What are some purposes for having an ARD meeting? We have an annual, right? That takes place annually by the date that it took place the previous year. So if you ever want to know when your annual ARD is, get out your ARD paperwork, see what the date of that annual was. Not any reviews in between, but the annual, and you'll know when it's coming up. My son's last year was March 7th, so I already knew first week in March we're going to be having that ARD. So we have the annual. Before we have that, before we ever even get started, we have what's called an initial. Told you I can't talk and write at the same time. Initial ARD is going to be at the very beginning of the process, right? Before they're not actually getting special ed services yet. This is just, they've been evaluated. They've done their full and individual evaluation, their FIE, and we have to come to ARD and determine eligibility, determine if they are eligible. That's called the initial. What are some other reasons we might have an ARD?
Changing services.
Okay, change of services, which would typically be called a review ARD. So it's not the annual that we have to have every year. The annual, by the way, is where we're setting new goals. We're reviewing the goals from the previous year, the annual goals, and all of that kind of stuff. But in between, we might have other things that come up. We might need to tweak an IEP. We might need to change placement. There are certain things that can be done outside of the ARD meeting, not having a formal ARD. But if there's going to be a change of a placement, we'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about placement. But if there's going to be a change of placement, the ARD committee has to decide that. That's not something you can do in a brief ARD or just amendment to an ARD. Some school districts do. But we would have to come back to ARD. We may not go through the whole everything of the ARD. It could be brief, but it would be considered a review ARD. So that would be in between the annuals. What other reason might we need to have an ARD?
Transfer.
Okay, transfer. Good. Transfer, of course, would be if you're transferring from another district, either out of state or in state, and they have to have that transfer ARD. So they're going to accept, by law, they have to accept whatever IEP is in place, currently in place from the previous school district, and they have to accept it for 30 days. Why? Because they don't know that child. They haven't worked with your child. They don't know what they can and can't do and all of that kind of thing. So the school district gets 30 days, I think it's calendar days, to get to know that child, and then they can determine if they want to change IEP goals or change services or whatever. So if that child was getting music therapy, right? This happened when I was working with Family to Family in Houston as a parent liaison, and people would call, and my son was getting music therapy in this district, and we moved to a district where they've never even heard of music therapy. Guess what? That was in place. They have to do it for 30 days.
And my son had that when we moved from North Carolina to Texas. He was in a full included classroom, and our new district did not have one of those. So I started contacting them months in advance to give them time to create the classroom. And they did. They knew they had to.
Right.
They told me multiple times, we were just contacting our lawyer one more time to make sure we have to do this. And the lawyer always came back and said, yes, you have to do this. And so, yeah.
And the reason is because they don't know that student. They can't take a student that they don't know and have never worked with and go, oh, well, they don't need that, because they can't make that decision. So transfer art is 30 days. So you would have that transfer art. They would accept the current stuff. They may decide that they want to do their own evaluations, which a lot of school districts do. They don't want to accept that other school district's evaluation for whatever reason. And they're going to do their own. That's fine. They can do that. And they have 30 days to get it done, and come back to art in 30 days, and then they can put programs in place that they want.
You know, I could understand doing a reevaluation if you're moving from one state to another. But I had stuff in place in Colleen, and we moved to Cove, and Cove did a reevaluation. And I'm like, you're kidding. And the same people, they knew, you know, these diagnosticians could have called these ones because they go to stuff together.
Yeah,
Did they change
yeah.
anything?
No.
No.
Was that Gaddelli?
And sometimes it's just,
What's
that's
the
the
charge?
district policy, and we're just gonna always do our own
I
or
don't know,
whatever.
that sounds like a waste of money to me.
Katie was like that. Anytime somebody would come from a different district, they would always do their own. Well, guess what? When we moved from Katy to El Campo, they were glad to have that evaluation from Katy. They were like, this is awesome. We're going to use this. And I was like, great, because he had just had re-eval in 5th grade. It was a very complete re-eval. Okay, there's one other reason why when we might have to have an ARD, and it's called a manifestation. This is all on tape. And so my misspellings of stuff is going to be there forever. Okay. Manifestation determination. Okay. Does anybody know what that is?
Possibly like a regression or something that would happen, or something new.
Come on, a little bit on target. Anybody have had to deal with a manifestation determination? What do you know about
It
that?
would be when there's an incident and they're considering suspension or placement in the
Alternative
campus.
setting, right.
Yeah.
So what happens is that our students, even though they have disabilities, they are still responsible for the student code of conduct like every other student, right? We talk about that at the ARD. There's a place on the ARD where they actually check, is this student able to follow the student code of conduct or not? Although I don't think the not part even really matters, but that's just my opinion. And they break the student code of conduct. They do something disciplinary-wise that gets them suspended or put in school suspension or whatever, okay? That is called a change of placement because they are no longer in the placement that the ARD committee decided that they should be in to get their education. Now they're in a different placement. They're either in alternative school or whatever, okay?
Right, but that wouldn't be in school suspension.
Well,
Because, I mean,
in-school suspension still is a change of placement because they're not in their setting where they were ARDed.
so what you're saying is that They could call an art, but they could choose not to,
Okay,
depending, or,
the rule is, and this is, the procedural safeguards outline this, okay? So if 10 days, now doesn't even have to be 10 consecutive days. The rules say if there is 10 consecutive or a pattern of days adding up to 10 cumulative days, that they are out of that placement, after that 10th day, they have to do a manifestation determination art. That's required by the procedure. To determine if the art committee comes together and has to determine if that student's action was a direct manifestation of their disability. In other words, could they not help it, right? So the art committee comes together and they have to answer 2 questions, which I find kind of humorous actually. One question they have to answer is, did the school fail to implement their IEP? So the art committee, which we have already discussed, is full of professionals, is sitting there determining if they did not do the IEP, right? Now, there could be some instances where the IEP wasn't met, but they have to answer that question. Did they not implement the IEP, and that's why this thing occurred that the student did? Or, and it's not and, it's or, I found out, because I thought it was and then I went to a training, and they went, no, it was actually at the PATH conference. And we had an attorney there. She's going to do a webinar for us in June. It's way down the road in June, but I actually have her handout in the Parent Leader Toolkit, so you'll be able to see that. But she said it's not and, it's not and, it's or. Or is that action a direct result of the student's disability? Okay. I don't know about you, but I'm not thinking that any school is going to go, yeah, no, we didn't implement the IEP. That's why it happened. So we have to rely on that thing that it's a manifestation of the disability. Now there's going to be some discussion on that too, right? There's going to be some, so then that's where our educational evaluations come into play. We can pull out that